And I think that, when you see footage from the Third Reich and you see the crowds of people revering Adolf Hitler, I mean, it's almost like being in a dream. You just don't see crowds like that for leaders. One is because for the longest time, we have not really been in an intense atmosphere that is conducive for that sort of thing to happen, for that sort of phenomenon to take place, where you have the ginormous crowds being rallied up and inspired by one leader. The reason why Hitler was popular was because the atmosphere was very tense. So people say, well, how come today you don't see these kinds of crowds in Germany? Because Germany has never had a politician like Adolf Hitler since World War II. That's the reason why. And Germany today is transitioning into a very tense environment. There already is a tense political environment, but it's only going to get more intense. In other words, you are seeing the beginning stage of season 3 of the German-Russian wars. I don't think there has really been serious work or serious research done as to why people voted for Adolf Hitler. Weimar Germany was not too different from the modern day Western world that exists right now, which means that we could produce another Hitler. So it says here, caught between Russia and the US, Germany aims to be a stronger force in NATO. So what's happening here? The United States for years has been telling Germany that it needs to really become more militarily independent, that Germany needs to spend more money on its defense. And so the Americans have been a lot more friendly with the Russians. Meanwhile, at the same time, the Americans have been pushing the Germans to amplify their military spending, to increase their military capacity. And so the Germans are now getting the green light to revive their old militarism. That's what is happening. So it says here, as Germany's new chancellor increases military spending, he has presided over the activation of a German tank brigade based in Lithuania and raised alarms about the threat from Russia. So this is a really interesting installment that has happened in this whole phenomenon of tensions between Russia and Germany. The Germans, for the first time, have deployed troops within Europe. This has never happened since World War II. So this is very, very significant, just given the historical background. This is Germany that we are dealing with. We are dealing with the country that gave us World War II. This is the country that gave us the Third Reich. It's the country that gave us Hitler. It's the country that gave us the Holocaust. It's the country that gave us the genocidal policy of the Nazis. And so for this country to now deploy troops for the first time since the nightmare of World War II, I believe is extremely significant and is worthy of our attention and should not be ignored. Albeit the Germans have deployed 700 troops into Lithuania, that number is going to grow into the thousands. That's why the Germans are planning on starting to build schools, housing, and even daycare centers, because they know that thousands of German soldiers are going to be deployed into Lithuania, and that means that they're going to be bringing their families with them. So we are going to be seeing the formation of a German military enclave within the Baltic region, and specifically within Lithuania, which borders with Russia. Given the fact that Russia's worst war was with the Germans during World War II, that is going to be very alarming for the Russians, and it already is alarming for the Russians, and the Russians are paying attention to the point where Sergei Lavrov recently stated that Germany is making a very big error, given the fact that it had a war with the Russians less than a century ago. And we all know what that war is. We all know what that war was. So this is a pretty big deal. You are seeing a mark on the storyline for the revival of German militarism. In other words, you are seeing the beginning stage of season 3 of the German-Russian wars. And you are going to be seeing another German-Russian war in the future. And you can already see the signs of this. It's very, very obvious. So it says here, as he takes office, Germany's new chancellor, Friedrich Merz, faces a delicate test dealing with a Russia willing to flex its muscle on its eastern flank and with an American president intent on making NATO allies bear more of a burden for their own defense. And this is a pretty big deal. And it says here, squeezed by the two sides, Mr. Merz has been trying to juggle how to move Germany toward more of a leadership role in NATO without antagonizing a more militaristic Russia. This is very significant, in my opinion, because the Germans want to revive their military capacity. At the same time, they don't want to provoke the Russians. They don't want to get into a war with Russia, at least not right now. The reason for this is because the Germans do not have the capacity to fight a war with the Russians right now. They want to be able to increase their military capabilities to the point where in the future, they will be able to actually handle a serious conflict with the Russians. Right now, they can't, but they want to get to that point. So right now, they don't want to antagonize their Russian neighbor. So they're just slowly rebuilding their military, slowly reviving their military strength. And there is going to come a point when the Germans are going to have the capacity to actually handle a serious war with the Russians. That is going to happen in the future, just given the history. Now, I've talked about this before, but I'll bring this up again. The second biggest party in Germany is a very nationalistic party. It's called the AfD. The AfD is also the most militaristic party. We'll talk more about that later. And not only do they want to revive Germany's military might, but the AfD also wants Germany to become a nuclear-armed power. And the AfD also wants to revive Germany's militarist culture. Germany today wants to revive its military strength, but the government right now, the leading government right now of Chancellor Merz, doesn't necessarily want to bring back the old Prussian militarist culture or the old Wehrmacht militarist culture. They just want to make Germany's military strong again. Whereas the AfD wants to make Germany's military strong again, but at the same time, the AfD, unlike Merz, the AfD wants to have a strong military, but at the same time, it wants to have Germany become totally independent and does not want Germany to become, or does not want Germany to does not want Germany to remain as a military vassal of NATO. So if the AfD gets what it wants, Germany will become totally militarily independent, will no longer be a vassal state of NATO, and will have nuclear weapons. And it will revive Germany's militarist culture. We're talking the militarist culture that has the goose stepping and the chants and the military chants and the military marches, all that together. All of the aesthetics of German militarism, the AfD wants to revive. So but you see, this is being pushed by the second biggest party of Germany. And they are a few steps away from becoming the biggest party in Germany. So if they become the biggest party in Germany and they get what they want, then you can expect Germany to have its old militarist culture revived. You can expect Germany to eventually get its hands on nuclear weapons or to produce its own nuclear weapons. You can expect Germany to have an even more militaristic culture. And you can expect Germany to have a massive military power that would be independent of NATO. And I think this is what the Germans are aiming for. And because the Americans are in this mindset of not wanting to get involved in other countries' wars, and they're of this mindset of having the Germans deal with Russia, I think eventually the Germans are going to say, we can't rely on the Americans, therefore, let's just form a Reich. And you're going to have the German Bundestag, but at the same time, you're going to have European auxiliary forces that'll be there to support the German Bundestag. That's what I think. Squeezed by the two sides, Mr. Merz has been trying to juggle how to move Germany toward more of a leadership role in NATO without antagonizing a more militaristic Russia. Last week, Mr. Merz traveled to Lithuania to preside over the activation of a German tank brigade that could serve as a bulwark against any Russian invasion through neighboring Belarus, which is seen as a potential staging ground for military action by Moscow. We've talked about this before, but there is, if you read up on geopolitics between the Russians and the Germans, a lot of geopolitical analysts believe that if there is a war between Russia and the rest of Europe, that it's going to spark around this area So here is Belarus, Lithuania, Poland, and then Russia through, this is Russia's province called Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad used to be a part of Germany, believe it or not, and then it went to the possession of the Russians as a result of World War II. Leningrad does not share a contiguous border with the Russians, but it is still a part of Russia nonetheless. It borders with Poland and Lithuania, and this is where a lot of geopolitical analysts believe the next war in Europe is going to begin. And it is believed that Russia will use Belarus as a route by which to go into this corridor here between Lithuania and Poland. And from this area, begin an invasion or begin a war in the Baltic regions and in Poland. Whether that's going to happen or not, I have no idea. But this is what a lot of analysts are saying, just given the whole geopolitical nature of it. Merz looks like an accountant. Yeah, Merz does not have the vibe of a Führer. He doesn't. I think that he is trying to make Germany stronger, just given the demands of the United States. Maybe he has an agenda. Maybe he has some sort of ideology of his own that wants to see Germany get strong again. But I don't think he is fit to be a Führer. I don't think he's fit to be another Hitler. I don't think he has it in him. He doesn't look like the type. I think that what Merz is doing is something that what Merz is doing is similar to what the Weimar Republic did. So the Weimar Republic paved the way for the militarist revival that Hitler underwent. So what the Weimar Republic did was it began to retrain and rearm its military, supposedly secretly, because it was against the rules to do this, given the fact that Germany was the loser in World War I, and the Americans told the Germans that they were not able, or that they were not allowed to have a serious military force. They weren't even really allowed to have effectively a navy. There was a very small naval force that the Weimar had, but it was pretty much useless. And so what the Weimar Republic began to do was it began to slowly rearm and retrain the German military, and they were doing it within the Soviet Union. They were doing it with the help of the Russians. Russians made a pretty big mistake doing that. And then when Hitler took power, what he did was he just revealed the entire plan to remilitarize Germany to the world. And he said, not only are we remilitarizing Germany, but I'm going to take the whole remilitarization of my country into third gear and really go through some serious amplification of the militarist policy that Weimar commenced. So I think what Merz is doing is similar to what Weimar was doing. Merz is paving the way for a Führer, or for a serious leader who is going to inspire the mob, who is going to rally up the masses to then say, okay, let's really take this remilitarization policy that has been getting pushed by NATO and amplify it up to third gear and make it something very, very scary, to the point where they're not going to be talking about 100,000 more German troops or a few 100,000, but millions of German troops. And the reason why I think a lot of young people don't want to join the military, be it in the United States or be it in Germany, is because there's not a strong military culture in a lot of the Western world. There's not a strong military culture in Germany right now. But if they can just revive that culture, I believe that you will be seeing a lot more young people actually just joining the German military in the name of nationalism. Right now, they're talking about defending democracy, and that doesn't really interest people in general. People are more interested in defending the country, in defending their culture, in defending blood and soil. That's what gets people really inspired, in my opinion. And people want a leader that they can follow, and Merz doesn't have it. People want a charismatic leader who's going to inspire them, who's going to reignite their spirit to have an interest to even going to war. That's what I believe. And I think that, when you see footage from the Third Reich and you see the crowds of people revering Adolf Hitler, I mean, it's almost like being in a dream. You just don't see crowds like that for leaders in the Western world. The only country that is close to the West where you see those sorts of crowds gathering together for a revered leader and some sort of a cult of personality is Turkey. You can see videos of Erdogan speaking, and the crowds are just as big as the crowds that the world saw for Adolf Hitler. But you don't see that sort of thing in the Western world. And I think the reason for that is because we haven't really... There's two reasons for this. There are two reasons for this, I believe. And I thought about this earlier this week, because I was watching footage of Adolf Hitler talking, and I was watching footage of the crowds and all that. And I was talking about this with my dad, because my dad told me, he says, you don't see crowds like this in the Western world. And I explained to him why I believe that is the case. And I think that there are two reasons. One is because for the longest time, for decades since the end of the Second World War, we have not really been in a tense atmosphere where we have not really been in an intense atmosphere that is conducive for that sort of thing to happen, for that sort of phenomenon to take place, where you have the ginormous crowds being rallied up and inspired by one leader. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is the reason why Hitler was popular was because the atmosphere was very tense. After World War One, the German people gave a chance to centrist politics. In the beginning, they did. The biggest party was the Social Democrats. After World War I, the biggest party were the Social Democrats. And the Social Democrats are still around today. They have a very long history in Germany, modern Germany. So you had the Social Democrats. And the Social Democrats, they were sort of interested in reviving Germany's military, and they were slowly rearming and retraining Germany's soldiers, et cetera, et cetera. That is true. At the same time, Weimar Germany was very degenerate. Weimar Germany was extremely liberal and extremely feministic. Oh, man. I was looking at a book last week on the history of Weimar. And the photos, man, I should show you the photos. I have the book with me. The photos of people in the Weimar looked like they could have been taken today. And they look surreally and bizarrely modern. And by modern, I mean they look like photos of people that you can see today. The women and how they looked and how they dressed and the way that they posed for the camera. And it was very modern. And it was so modern that if you were alive in those days and you saw Weimar and you saw how it was, you would have had difficulty believing that a man like Adolf Hitler was going to take power, because you would have thought, well, it's so liberal, it's so feministic. And Weimar Germany was very feministic. Weimar Germany was very liberal. Weimar Germany was very libertine, very almost anarchist in its culture. And so the Germans initially after World War I, they gave a chance to the Social Democrats. Like I said, they were the biggest party. And the Nazis initially didn't have major success. They didn't. The number of votes, or the percentage of the votes that they were getting, was in the single digits initially. But eventually, within the span of a decade or so, they were getting double digits in popularity. And it came to the point where they became the biggest party. Why did people love Adolf Hitler? Various reasons for this. It's very fascinating. And I think there hasn't really been, I'll be honest with you guys, I don't think there has really been serious work or serious research done as to why people voted for Adolf Hitler. I would one day, I told myself years ago, I'll never write a book again, because writing a book takes an enormous amount of time and money. It's just not, usually it's not a very good investment. But I think one day I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to write an entire essay. Because right now I'm working on an essay on the French right, the French far right. I think it's a very fascinating topic. And I'm about 3,000 or 4,000, almost 4,000 words in. I'm doing an in-depth study on the French far right. But I think after I'm done, I am going to write an essay on why people voted for Adolf Hitler. And I want to really give people an honest, black and white, blunt observation or a blunt presentation as to why people voted for Adolf Hitler. Because when I first, you see, people have this, I think people have this conception. They have this perception that there was World War I and then Hitler sort of rose up and then people loved him because he was a great speaker. He was a great speaker and he did inspire people. But why did he inspire people? And why did people open up their souls to him, so to speak? It's because of the instability that Germany had, and it's because of the fears that a lot of Germans had. And the big fear that the Germans had was becoming a Soviet satellite state. That was a huge concern that people had in those days. And the Soviet Union had a lot of influence in German society, believe it or not, it's true. By a lot of influence, I mean that there were a lot of people in Germany who wanted Germany to become a Soviet vassal. For example, there were multiple revolutions that were attempted and that were done in Germany. There was the Hamburg Revolution. There was also the Bavarian Revolution. The Bavarian Revolution succeeded. It lasted for a couple of weeks, but it did succeed. And in that revolution, what happened was you had a bunch of rebels who were effectively proxies of the Soviet Union, and they took over Bavaria. They straight up took it over. And a number of the people who were leading that revolution were Jewish. And they were in communication with Mr. Vladimir Lenin. And the leader of that revolution was Eugene Levine. Yes, Levine. I don't have to tell you what ethnicity he was a part of. And so what the Nazis did was they said, you see, these are the Jews. This is why they're our enemy. Vote for us and we will defeat them. So imagine you're living in Germany, your country's impoverished, you don't have a military, you're basically just controlled by the United States, you don't have any independence, and then you have, on top of that, these communist criminals who are trying to take over your country, and they're actually doing violence within your society. Crime rate is very high. You have communist terrorists who are shooting police officers. Yet this was a real thing. Michael Burleigh talks about this in his book on the Third Reich, how they were these communist rebels with guns, and they would actually do terrorist attacks in Germany. And there was one incident that happened in Weimar Germany where there was an ambush on German police officers. Or I think if I remember correctly, the Marxists began to do some sort of rebel rousing in one area. They lured the German officers into one particular street, and then once the German officers got to a certain position, there were snipers who were up in buildings, and from their lofty position, they began to fire on the police officers and ambush them. And this was a big terrorist attack that happened in Weimar Germany. And so this was done by leftist communists. And then everyone knows, not everyone, but a lot of people know about the Spartacist Revolution. That was another revolution that was attempted by Marxist people like Rosa Luxemburg, who was Jewish. And so the Nazis said, you see, guys, our politicians are not doing enough to fight against this. We're going to save you. Now, this is why I say, and I did a video about this a couple of years ago, this is why I say that a lot of people living today would have voted for Adolf Hitler. A lot of people. I think the majority, and I'm going to say this and I'm going to die on this hill, I think the majority of American conservatives would have voted for Adolf Hitler. I truly believe that. Just given the state that Germany was in, and given the instability of its society, and given how American conservatives and really Western conservatives in general will vote for any right-wing leader who's charismatic enough, regardless of their insidious beliefs, what that tells me is that the majority of conservatives today would have voted for Adolf Hitler. Because people in those days thought, man, we really got to fight against these Marxists. These Marxists are a threat. And what are people today talking about? Oh, the communist. Oh, the Marxist. Oh, the cultural Marxist. And what are people today doing? They're saying, even people in the United States, they're saying, look at these German nationalists today. Look at the AfD. They're so great. They're heroes. Well, if you want to vote for those people, because those people are going against quote-unquote cultural Marxism, back in the 1920s and 30s, you would have voted for the Nazis because the Nazis presented themselves as the solution to the Marxist threat. So there was a lot of instability, a lot of tension in Weimar Germany, and that's why people voted for Hitler. And given that environment, given that tense environment, that is why you had the ginormous, insanely huge crowds for Adolf Hitler. because people were so terrified, they were so scared, they were so longing, they were longing so much so for a hero that they found their hero. And when they found their hero, they amassed themselves into huge crowds for this man. They rallied around this man. So people say, well, how come today you don't see these kinds of crowds in Germany? Because Germany has never had a politician like Adolf Hitler since World War II. That's the reason why. And Germany today is transitioning into a very tense environment. There already is a tense political environment, but it's only going to get more intense. You have the problem with terrorism and crimes being done by foreigners. You have the situation of the German economy. You have the situation of Russia in Ukraine. And so this tense political atmosphere, or geopolitical atmosphere, in general, this type of atmosphere is only going to get worse. And when it does get worse, the Germans are going to boil over. All that tension is going to boil over into longing for a charismatic leader who's going to be so popular that you will see crowds like you did in the 1930s. And you're going to have that massive cult of personality. So I remember I was watching some Hitler speeches online, and my dad and I were watching them, and we saw these huge crowds. And my dad said, how come you don't see crowds like that today? And I said, you will. Just give it time. You will. Look at this book. This is the front cover. It's called Vertigo, The Rise and Fall of Weimar Germany. This is a book that came out recently. And look at the front cover. This is from Weimar. This looks like something out of that movie. Remember that horror film that came out some years ago? Hysteria or something like that. Remember that? That's what it reminds me of. It reminds me of a horror movie. Like they're in a girls are in a dance club, but it's really a cult, and they're doing human sacrifice for Mother Earth. But look at this photo. I mean, it's surreal. Isn't that photo surreal? This is from Weimar. Two chicks smoking. They're smoking cigarettes like this, and you could see something like this today, with the haircut and everything. Look at that. It's very modern. Yeah, it looks like something out of the 80s. Yeah, look at this. I mean, look at this. It is very feminist. Some lady in front of a car smoking. If we could just colorize these photos, we would just totally sever it from the past. It would look very modern. I mean, you could see this on Instagram, right? Let me see if you guys can see it. Hold up. You guys can see this on Instagram? That's an Instagram photo. That's Instaho worthy. That's on the Instaho. This one gets about what? How many likes do you think this would get on Instaho? 1,000, 2,000 likes? That's Instaho worthy right there. The Asian lady's name is Anna May Wong. Leni Riefenstahl is the other one, and Marlene Dietrich. Miss Wong and Miss Dietrich and Miss Riefenstahl. We made it to the party. Slay, queen, slay. Look at that. Made it to the party. It was so glamorous. Take a photo. This is totally Instaho worthy. Totally Instaho. And all the dudes be liking it. They'd be liking this photo. And they'd be like, oh, my waifu. Asian waifu. And hey, listen, if I was alive in the 30s or the 20s, I'd be saying, guys, you know all this shit's gonna fall apart, right? And then some big Führer is gonna take over. You know this, right? No. Weimar is so feminist and it's so liberal. I remember when I first began warning people about the revival of Nazism back in 2016. Do you know what people were telling me? Nazism will never rise up. Why not? Germany's too liberal. And what the hell is this? That's Instaho. If they had Instaho in those days, imagine the photos if they had Instaho back in the 1920s. Take this for the Instagram, yeah, for the gram. Marlene, please take the photo for us. This is so perfect. I really had to buy this book because the entire book is on the history of Weimar. I gotta read this because I want to know what the world was like before Hitler took over. And you know what the book says in the introduction? It says Weimar Germany was not too different from the modern day Western world that exists right now, which means that we could produce another Hitler.